How's it going, folks? I'm Matthew. This is Lemora's Cards, and today we're talking about some wild new cards coming from Modern Horizons 3. This set has not even had, we're not even in official spoiler season yet, but we've had some leaks, and format's already shaken up. There's already some cards that seem like staples in some decks, cards you're going to see in a lot of your games, a couple more fringe players, and then just some like new options and basically a new version of a cEDH staple already. As always, thank you to my amazing patrons over on Patreon. You get access to new perks like coaching, private deck videos, stuff like that over there. And while you're here, like, comment, subscribe. I'm going to be doing coverage of everything in MH3 that looks remotely cEDH playable. This is going to be one of the rare sets where I actually am doing preview coverage, and I'm going to be talking about cards in the format where I think they're going to have a position, how I think they're going to play out, things like that. So if you're interested in that, I'll be making those videos the moment I see cards. I'll be recording. If you want that coverage, subscribe. With all that being said, let's hop into it. Use the link in the description below to download Whatnot, and you'll get $15 to use to buy Magic singles, sealed product, get anything that you want, really. There's no limits. You just get $15 on the account for free just for signing up. This is one of the best ways you can support the channel. And again, it's just free stuff. Use the link in the description below. Give Whatnot a try. Now, we don't have a lot of cards to look at today. There were a lot more leaks than I'm going to cover, but I'm really just wanting to highlight the cards that look like they might show up in cEDH, as opposed to like every single one of the cards from the precons. You know, most of the Eldrazi cards we saw probably not going to show up. Maybe that Null Elemental Blast. There's a colorless Elemental Blast that hits multicolor spells. Maybe in a couple decks, but for the most part, we're going to stick to things that I actually kind of expect to see. Starting with Harbinger of the Seas. This is one blue, and this is basically a blue Magus of the Moon. Non-basic lands are islands. It does have an extra pip, probably mainly to try to balance it for modern merfolk, where I think this card's probably going to be quite a banger. Magus of the Moon and Blood Moon, those are effects that we see in low color red decks that are trying to punish high color piles. Harbinger of the Seas is interesting because I think there are decks potentially like, maybe Kennen or something like that that could be interested in this kind of effect. Whether turning things into islands versus mountains is better is a little tough. I heard some people talk about how they think this is worse because cEDH is more blue, but depending on how you're using it, I kind of think this is better because a lot of the proactively powerful things, one of the biggest examples is like, well, what's the point of turning things into mountains when people just cast Dockside? You can still use mountains to cast Dockside, and you fix your colors. Of course, islands can't cast Dockside Extortionist usually, but also like one of the downsides of playing like a Magus of the Moon is when you do hit those high color piles, if you are shutting down their colors, a lot of times you might be shutting down their interaction, and then the deck that's less affected by it, like Grixis Turbo deck, when they just go Dockside, win a temp, and the other person's sitting there looking at like Swan Song, Flusterstorm that they can't cast because their lands are mountains, that could be a real feel bad, and it can feel like that really throws the game. And stax effects can do that in general, but I think there's some interesting play to this one. I'm not sure what deck specifically is going to play it. I know with a new stax piece that does stuff, I know people are going to play it, right? That's just what's going to happen. Again, this isn't a card, it's not going to be like a slam dunk and everything, but this is an effect people, look for, and I expect decks to see some kind of low color blue control decks. We see like back to basics shells, maybe decks like Urza, things like that. And I definitely think for decks that are trying to actually slow the game down, making everything blue versus red is a better way to do that. Next up, there's a couple here on the screen, but we're looking at Volatile Stormdrake. This is 1 in a blue, flying, hexproof from activated and triggered abilities. When it enters the battlefield, exchange control of Volatile Stormdrake and target creature an opponent controls. If you do, you get 4 energy, then sacrifice that creature unless you pay an amount of energy equal to its mana value. So this is a new Gilded Drake with a couple differences. There's been a little bit of discussion about whether this is better or worse than Gilded Drake, and it depends, because if you're wanting to steal a Crom or a Tivit, and you gotta pay the mana for Tivit, a bigger thing that's sitting in play, it is worse. It can't do that. What it can do that Gilded Drake can't do is destroy a creature. Basically, you can pay 1 in a blue, give them the Stormdrake, and then not pay the energy. So for example, if somebody has a Hate Bear in play, like a Collector Oof, something like that, and you want to just straight up destroy it for 1 in a blue on a creature, give them a 3/2, and they will no longer have a Collector Oof because you let it die, which is not something this card would probably be played for, that effect, but it being able to be most of a Gilded Gilded Drake on top of also being modal kind of destroy target creature and give them a 3/2 looks pretty good to me. I definitely think this is a card you can expect to see. Is it better than Gilded Drake? Kind of questionable, but I do think that flexibility of being able to destroy a creature is going to be really nice, especially in lower color decks that are just like, yeah, I'll play both of these Drakes, sure. And there is some kind of flexibility with it and like playing it and bouncing it and doing it again to be able to Drake, because you just save the energy up because you'll have those energy counters. And also, if there are more cards that are powerful and use energy, you know, energy is not a mechanic we've really used much in cEDH. I didn't expect to see energy cards that would be cEDH playable, but if there are more cards like this that just create their own energy to do a thing, there might be a stuff that makes enough energy to where this is basically just a Gilded Drake, or this also powers up some other spell and it makes other cards more of a consideration. So just something to keep in mind. I don't expect an energy cEDH deck to come about, but if there are like 3 or 4 good blue energy cards, then, you know, they end up more powerful and it ends up being kind of like a tiebreaker. Next up, a blue card I expect to see a lot of play. That's Flare of Denial. 1 blue, instant. You may sacrifice a non-token blue creature rather than pay the spell's mana cost. Counter target spell. It's a 3 mana counter spell at the very least, like a cancel. A new free counter spell for cEDH, and I definitely think this one's very playable. Where it's at its best is going to be, of course, low color blue decks, because they're more likely to have blue creatures if they're on a decent creature count. And then Thrasios decks, I think specifically, are going to be really big on this because you can sacrifice your Thrasios to counter a spell. It's also a new free counter spell that hits creatures, no card type restriction at all, which is really big. Currently, it's Pact of Negation, Force of Will, MBT, basically to free hit a creature. This is going to be a big player. I don't think it's going to show up in every deck. I don't think a deck like Blue Farm is going to want this, right? They don't run that many blue creatures, and the one they do is like Crom. Maybe it will show up in some of those decks. People will definitely be testing it, but I really expect this to be in like the Thrasios piles, maybe the Kinnan decks potentially. Those decks that have like cheaper commanders they don't mind sacrificing, or who have more, you know, incidental creatures that they have lying around. This isn't like a free roll like Fierce Guardianship, you know, is for most decks, but this is definitely a spell that you should expect to see in some of your games. And again, especially those Thrasios piles. I'm ready to run this in Rog Thras. It looks like it's going to be good in Dargo Thras, decks like that. You can like cast your Thassa's Oracle, you know, ETB, hold priority, Tainted Pact, or Consult. Then they go to counter it, and then you Flare of Denial, sacrificing Thassa's Oracle. That's a cool little trick that you can do with it. And last but certainly not least, we have Necrodominance. Black, legendary enchantment. Skip your draw step. At the beginning of your end step, you may pay any amount of life. If you do, draw that many cards. Your maximum hand size is 5. If a card or token would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Like the card that this is referencing, Necropotence, this has a lot of text and really cool art with Croxa on it. It makes me kind of think we're maybe more likely to get a new Elder Titan, like a new Uro or something like that. Let's kind of evaluate this one. It's tough. One of the same downsides as Necropotence, skip your draw step, not too bad. At the beginning of your end step is how it works now. You pay any amount of life. So play the spell, go to your end step, you have a trigger, pay the life, draw the cards. Okay, notable differences versus Necropotence. You actually draw the cards, they're not exiled and then put into your hand. That means a card like Orcish Bowmasters affects this. It's the first thing everybody comes up with. The significant part of that is that they can't cheat it in, kind of like with Tymna. There's no in-between moment for them to trick you or get you. It's all one trigger. So if you have that first trigger and then they Bowmasters in response, you can then kind of decide how much life you're going to pay so you don't die to Bowmasters. Or if you're going all in to Born Upon a Wind, it really doesn't matter. Maximum hand size is 5. This one is really critical, I think, for the early Necros, right? So like with Necropotence going, you know, you're playing a deck like Rockside, something like that, going land, Dark Ritual, Necropotence, and then using it kind of more as just a draw engine, have kind of a setup turn on turn 2, and then turn 3 is where you really go off, or you do like a Final Fortune thing. That's going to be trickier with this because you're sculpting a 5. Necropotence can be kind of resource intensive if you don't already have some development, right? Necropotence itself already kind of wants a little bit of development. If you don't have like the mana, even, you know, to do Born Upon a Wind, Final Fortune kind of requires some development anyways. I think this card requires it even a little bit more, and doing like turn 1 Necrodominance, I don't think is going to be the peak of this card. I think using this kind of in the mid game as a payoff after you got like 5-6-ish mana, play this thing, pay a bunch of life, try to hit Final Fortune or Born, and then go off. Born is obviously going to be much better. Again, if you're Final Fortuning, you're only sculpting a 5, which isn't that bad, but it is relevant. The bottom effect, while similar to Necropotence, is significantly different because it's a replacement effect and it hits everything that goes to your graveyard. So Underworld Breach is not possible through this at all. With Necropotence, you can do Born Upon a Wind, and then Breach. The Lion's Eye Diamond cards, when they get discarded, you have triggers and that you can respond to because you've done Born Upon a Wind, so it doesn't affect you at all. And then also brain freezing yourself when you have a Necropotence in play doesn't do anything. Those cards don't get exiled. This just straight up, you have a rest in peace for your graveyard. Nothing of yours can hit the graveyard. It all goes straight to exile. So Breach, any of that is completely offline. You cannot do it. There's no tricks around it beyond getting rid of your own Necrodominance. You know, there are some more significant downsides, but in terms of just having another payoff for turbo black decks, we've got it. If you want an effect like Necropotence, this is a consideration. I'm going to be testing it in Rock's Eye. I'm sure other people will be. Other turbo decks going to be trying it out. I know Eric's going to be trying it in Corvold. Necropotence, one of the most broken cards of all time. A little bit worse, Necropotence isn't too bad, right? There are just some considerations and things to keep in mind when you're evaluating if the card fits in your deck. If the only way you can win is through the graveyard and you don't have access to like a blue bounce spell, for instance, or Born Upon a Wind, yeah, the card's a little bit worse. I think in Grixis piles, it's probably going to be significantly better than it is in like maybe some of the mono black decks, right? That might struggle to win at instant speed without use of their graveyard. Like a deck like Crick, which might like Necropotence a little bit more, something like that. You can't do like Entomb, any kind of shenanigans like that. Blue decks that can bounce this thing, or, you know, have access to Born Upon a Wind, or red decks that have Final Fortune, obviously going to be able to utilize this card a little bit better. The green decks that are using Crop Rot Emergent Zone could end up being like one of the best shells for this is those 4-color like green, you know, Vile Smasher Thrasios decks that have even more access to ways to break this kind of effect. So that's an interesting spot to see it too. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you're thinking about MH3. I'm super hyped for this set. I can't wait to see the red flare. I hope it's broken with Rogue Rack. Absolutely hyped to be previewing this set. I'm just constantly scouring for leaks. There's a chance that I end up recording more for this video after it's done because there might be something else leaked. So super excited. Let me know down below what your thoughts on some of these cards are. Personally, can't wait to jam Necrodominance in Rock's Eye. Can't wait to jam Flare of Denial in Rog Thras. Super hyped. So thank you so much for watching. And as always, go play cEDH. Have a good one, everybody.